On July 12, 1943, as the dust settled on the devastated fields of Kursk, the Soviet Union didn't just hold the line. They turned the tide with an overwhelming response that would mark the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany in the East. As the Wehrmacht reeled from their losses at Kursk, the Soviet generals were already plotting their next devastating moves. The remarkable Soviet victory at the Battle of Kursk, often cited as the largest tank battle in history, had depleted the German forces, both in morale and in material. The Germans, having lost a staggering 500 tanks and about 70,000 men, were in a state of tactical withdrawal. In stark contrast, Soviet leaders, emboldened by their defensive success, were meticulously planning their counter-offensives. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, along with other key Soviet commanders, understood that the weakened German forces presented an opportune moment for a strategic pivot from defense to offense. The immediate aftermath of Kursk saw the Soviets planning not just a single retaliatory push, but a series of coordinated offensives aimed at exploiting the weakened German lines. The plans for Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev were set into motion, targeting the critical German-held areas that would disrupt their ability to mount any future large-scale offensive. Operation Kutuzov, named after the famed Russian Field Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov, who outsmarted Napoleon in 1812, began on July 12, 1943, directly north of Kursk. Its focus was the Orel region, where the German Ninth Army had been severely battered but not yet broken. Soviet forces, comprising the Bryansk, Western, and Central fronts, were tasked to encircle and destroy the German forces in Orel. The operation involved over 1.3 million men, 2,500 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft, showcasing the Soviet capability to muster vast resources rapidly. Parallel to Operation Kutuzov was Operation Rumyantsev, targeting the area south of Kursk, primarily around the city of Belgorod. Launched on August 3, 1943, this offensive was spearheaded by the Voronezh Front under General Nikolai Vatutin and the Stepa Front led by Ivan Konev. Their goal was clear: to recapture Belgorod and Kharkov, thereby breaking through the southern wing of the German forces. The intensity of the Soviet attack, backed by significant artillery and air support, forced the Germans into a hasty retreat, liberating Belgorod on August 5th and Kharkov by August 23rd. The success of these offensives was not merely in territorial gains, but in forcing the German armies into a prolonged defensive stance for the remainder of the war. The strategic genius of Soviet planning post-Kursk was evident in how these operations were orchestrated. Each move was calculated to hit where the Germans were weakest, and the timing was meticulously planned to prevent the Germans from regrouping. The Soviet High Command, including figures like Alexander Vasilevsky and Konstantin Rokossovsky, coordinated these massive offensives, ensuring a seamless flow of men and materiel. This strategic depth was a testament to the lessons learned from earlier brutal encounters with the Wehrmacht. As the Red Army surged forward through the territories previously occupied by the Germans, numerous first-hand accounts from Soviet soldiers highlighted the stark contrasts between the initial grim days of the war and the now palpable sense of victory. One poignant account from a Red Army officer recalled the moment they liberated a village near Kharkov, describing the joy and relief on the faces of civilians, juxtaposed with the visible signs of harsh German occupation. With the stage set and the German forces weakened, the Soviet military launched two critical operations, Operation Kutuzov and Operation Rumyantsev, which not only recaptured significant territories, but also inflicted irreparable damage to the German war machine on the Eastern Front. The relentless push of the Red Army, supported by strategic acumen and heroic valor, marked these operations not just as military successes, but as turning points in the Great Patriotic War. This shift not only decimated the German forces, but also marked a renewed vigor in the Soviet war effort, setting the stage for the eventual push towards Berlin. Operation Kutuzov, launched on July 12, 1943, was a decisive Soviet offensive aimed at retaking the strategic city of Orel and disrupting the German Wehrmacht's offensive capabilities. Named after the famed Russian Field Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov, the operation was designed to exploit the weakened German forces distracted by their offensive at Kursk. The city of Orel was crucial due to its position as a railway hub, which made it a linchpin in the German supply and communication lines. The offensive began with a massive artillery barrage, involving over 3,000 guns and mortars, which pounded German defensive positions around Orel. This initial bombardment was designed not only to weaken the German lines, but also to mask the sound of tank engines as the Soviet 11th Guards Army, under Lieutenant General Hovhannes Bagramyan, maneuvered into position. The intensity and accuracy of the Soviet artillery during Operation Kutuzov is often credited with breaking the morale of the German troops stationed there. As the artillery fire lifted, the Soviet armored and infantry divisions surged forward. The battle-hardened troops moved through the smoldering ruins of the front lines, engaging in close-quarters combat with the remaining German defenders. Among these soldiers was Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, who later recounted the relentless advance of his platoon, despite heavy losses. "Every step forward cost us blood," Pavlov said, "but we knew the liberation of Orel would turn the tide in the entire region." Pavlov's story exemplifies the fierce determination of the Red Army soldiers during this critical phase of the war. The Soviet forces utilized a combination of deep battle tactics, where they penetrated deeply into enemy lines to disrupt rear areas, and shock tactics, which involved concentrated attacks at weak points in the German defenses. This approach allowed them to encircle and isolate large numbers of German troops. By July 26th, the Soviets had managed to surround and cut off the German Ninth Army, inflicting severe casualties and forcing them into a disorganized retreat. A poignant personal story from the front lines involves Captain Maria Oktyabrskaya, who joined the fight to avenge her husband killed by the Germans. She purchased a tank, which she named Fighting Girlfriend, and took part in some of the fiercest battles of Operation Kutuzov. Her bravery and skill in handling her tank became legendary among her comrades, symbolizing the personal stakes many Soviet soldiers carried into battle. By August 5th, the Red Army had recaptured Orel, marking the first major city to be liberated following the German invasion. The victory at Orel was not just a tactical win, but a significant psychological blow to the Nazis, proving that the Soviet forces could not only defend, but also reclaim their territory with formidable prowess. The retaking of Orel forced the German command to reconsider their strategies and marked a shift in the momentum of the Eastern Front. As Operation Kutuzov pushed the Germans back in the north, to the south, another Soviet force was readying a strike of equal magnitude. This forthcoming assault, known as Operation Rumyantsev, aimed to liberate the city of Kharkov, creating a multi-frontal challenge that the German forces would find increasingly difficult to repel. Together, these operations signified the growing strength and coordination of the Soviet military efforts, setting a relentless pace that would eventually carry them through to Berlin. As the dust settled on the devastated Eastern Front, Operation Rumyantsev kicked off on August 3, 1943, signaling a fierce Soviet counterattack aimed at recapturing Belgorod and Kharkov. Spearheaded by the Voronezh and Steppe fronts, commanded by Generals Nikolai Vatutin and Ivan Konev respectively, this operation was crucial in reversing the tide of war in the Soviet favor. The operation began with a massive artillery barrage, using over 1,000 guns that pounded German positions, creating a cacophony of destruction that heralded the advance of nearly 2 million Soviet troops. The early stages of the operation were marked by intense combat as the Red Army encountered well-entrenched German forces. Soviet tanks, including the formidable T-34s and the heavy K-Vi ones, rolled forward under the cover of roaring Katyusha rocket launchers. The German defenses crumbled under this combined arms assault, showcasing the Soviet mastery of mobile warfare. By August 5th, Belgorod was liberated, marking the first significant victory of the operation. The city's recapture was not just a territorial gain, but a severe blow to the morale of the German Army Group South. The focus then shifted to Kharkov. The Soviets adopted encirclement tactics that had been refined during previous battles. Multiple infantry and armored units executed pincer movements around the city, squeezing the German forces into an ever-tightening trap. From August 12th, fierce urban combat engulfed Kharkov, with house-to-house fighting becoming the norm. Soviet soldiers, many of whom were fighting to liberate their homeland, displayed extraordinary bravery and resilience. One poignant account comes from Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, who recalled, "Every building was a fortress, every window a sniper's nest, but our resolve was unbreakable. We fought for every inch with blood and fury." By August 23rd, after grueling battles and substantial losses on both sides, Kharkov was finally in Soviet hands. The city's liberation was emblematic of Soviet endurance and tactical ingenuity, marked prominently by the effective use of sniper teams and sappers who meticulously cleared paths through the dense minefields laid by retreating German troops. The fall of Kharkov was a decisive blow to the Wehrmacht, significantly weakening their hold on the Eastern Front. The success of Operation Rumyantsev was not solely due to the bravery of the troops, but also to the strategic brilliance of the Soviet command. The integration of infantry, armor, and air support demonstrated the evolution of Soviet military tactics since the harrowing days of Operation Barbarossa. With over 70,000 German casualties and crucial territories regained, the operation underscored the shifting momentum. The Red Army's ability to adapt and innovate in warfare was becoming increasingly clear to both friends and foes alike. The impact of these victories extended beyond the immediate tactical advantages. With Belgorod and Kharkov back under Soviet control, the Red Army had not only regained vital territory, but had also inflicted irreparable damage to the German strategic posture in the east. This operation paved the way for future Soviet advances and set the stage for the broader strategic shift that would eventually lead to the downfall of Nazi Germany. The recapture of these key cities was celebrated across the Soviet Union as a symbol of resilience and a prelude to ultimate victory, capturing the imagination and bolstering the morale of the Soviet people. With significant victories at Belgorod and Kharkov, the Soviet offensives not only recaptured key territories, but also set the stage for a broader strategic shift. This shift would continue to build momentum, propelling the Soviet forces westward and marking the beginning of the end for Nazi presence in Eastern Europe. The success of Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev not only recaptured territory, but also demonstrated the growing might and resilience of the Red Army. By August 1943, the momentum on the Eastern Front had decisively shifted. The Wehrmacht, previously deemed an unstoppable force, incurred substantial losses. In Operation Kutuzov alone, the Germans lost approximately 200,000 men, a stark contrast to the 70,000 casualties suffered by the Soviets. This operation, aimed at relieving pressure on the Kursk salient, marked a significant turning of the tide. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's report to Hitler lamented the considerable weakening of our combat strength, particularly in armored units, which had been the spearhead of earlier successes. Following the twin victories at Belgorod and Kharkov, the Red Army's strategic gains were not merely territorial, but also psychological and material. The liberation of these cities bolstered Soviet morale and provided a substantial boost to civilian support, critical for the sustainability of war efforts on such a massive scale. Moreover, the recapture of key regions facilitated the recovery of resources, notably the coal mines in the Donets Basin, essential for fueling the Soviet war machine. The broader impacts on the Eastern Front were profound and immediate. The Soviet victories directly influenced subsequent operations, notably the Lower Dnieper Offensive and Operation Bagration, which would later lead to the liberation of Belarus and substantial parts of Poland. The weakening of the German Army Group South opened a Pandora's box of strategic vulnerabilities, allowing Soviet forces to push deeper into occupied territories with increased confidence and decreased resistance. German military strategy, on the other hand, faced a crisis of adaptation. The losses in men and materiel during the summer offensives were a blow from which the Wehrmacht never fully recovered. Historian Ian Kershaw noted that the relentless Soviet assaults had bled the German forces white, a sentiment echoed in numerous Wehrmacht communications intercepted by Soviet intelligence. The attrition warfare favored by the Soviets had effectively exhausted the German capability for sustained offensive operations, forcing them into a defensive stance for the remainder of the war. The aftermath of the Soviet counteroffensives also signaled a shift in international perceptions. Allies in the West, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, began to view the Soviet Union not just as a beleaguered nation, but as a formidable power capable of turning the tide against Hitler. This was reflected in the increased material support provided under Lend-Lease agreements, which saw a significant uptick in the supplies and equipment sent to the Soviet Union after the victories in 1943. The strategic repercussions were equally significant on the home front. Reports from soldiers who fought in these battles, collated in the Soviet archives, reflect a renewed belief in victory. Captain Ivan Petrov, in a letter home, wrote, "For the first time, I felt the war could be won. We were no longer just defending. We were claiming back our land." This sentiment was widespread among the troops, permeating through the ranks and fostering a renewed vigor that would carry through to the subsequent offensives. In conclusion, the successful Soviet counteroffensives of 1943 were pivotal, not only in recapturing lost ground, but also in setting the stage for a broader strategic overhaul. The German army was left reeling from these defeats, which directly contributed to their gradual yet irreversible decline on the Eastern Front. As the Red Army marched westward, the balance of power had clearly shifted, setting the stage for what would eventually be the collapse of Nazi control in Eastern Europe. The strategic implications of these Soviet victories thus extended far beyond the immediate military outcomes, reshaping the entire course of the Second World War in the East. The Soviet counteroffensives, Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev, not only marked a decisive shift in the control of the Eastern Front, but also laid a strategic groundwork that would ultimately hasten the demise of Nazi Germany. The aftermath of these operations saw the Wehrmacht permanently crippled, losing nearly 500,000 men, a devastating blow from which they never fully recovered. The Red Army, pushing westward, began liberating occupied territories, signaling a turning point that would lead to the eventual fall of Berlin in 1945. The immense sacrifices made by the Soviet forces during these counteroffensives cannot be overstated. In Operation Kutuzov, for instance, the Soviets deployed over 1.3 million troops, a staggering number that underscores the scale and desperation of the conflict. The human cost was profound, with civilian and military casualties in the millions. Soviet soldier Ivan Petrov, in a letter home dated August 1943, wrote poignantly of the rivers of blood shed in the battle, but also of the unbending will of the people that he witnessed. This narrative of sacrifice and resolve became a cornerstone of Soviet, and later, Russian national identity and memory. The heroism displayed by the Soviet soldiers was not only instrumental in their military victories, but also served as a crucial element in the broader narrative of the war. The tenacity of the Red Army during these offensives provided the Soviet Union with moral high ground in the post-war era. Stories of individual and collective heroism, like that of sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who accrued 309 confirmed kills, or the relentless defense at key locations by vastly outnumbered forces, were integral to Soviet propaganda and helped forge a powerful legacy of resilience and valor. Post-war, the Soviet Union meticulously cultivated the memory of these offensives. Monuments and memorials, such as the colossal Motherland Call statue in Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, serve as enduring reminders of the sacrifices made. Annually, Victory Day on May 9th transforms into a profound national celebration, reflecting on both the sorrow and the pride derived from these monumental battles. In contemporary Russia, this legacy is preserved and propagated through education and public discourse, often emphasizing the narrative of a heroic Soviet Union standing against the Nazi aggression almost single-handedly. Operation Kutuzov and Operation Rumyantsev also had significant implications for military tactics and strategies. The operations marked a departure from previous defensive strategies employed by the Soviets, showcasing a shift towards large-scale offensive maneuvers that involved complex coordination between multiple army fronts. The success of these operations influenced subsequent Soviet military tactics during World War II and were studied extensively in military academies around the world. The legacy of these offensives is twofold. It is a story of immense human suffering and monumental heroism. The strategic victories achieved during the summer of 1943 not only blunted the Nazi offensive capabilities, but also bolstered the Soviet Union's position as a dominant military power in the post-war world. The operations reshaped not only the military landscape, but also the geopolitical contours of the 20th century, leading to the emergence of the Soviet Union as a superpower in the bipolar world that followed. This complex legacy continues to influence Russian military and political thinking, as well as its historical narrative, presenting the Soviet role in World War II as pivotal in the defeat of Nazi Germany and a testament to national strength and sacrifice. Such reflections ensure that the significance of the Red Tide, the Soviet counter-offensive, remains a key chapter in the annals of World War II history, remembered for its strategic brilliance and the indomitable spirit of the Red Army. The Soviet counteroffensives of 1943 were not just military maneuvers, but a turning point that signaled the beginning of the end for Nazi dominance on the Eastern Front. Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev stand as monumental testaments to strategic planning and the indomitable spirit of the Soviet people. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button for more fascinating historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.